Welcome back to our program. I am Wu Ruiguo. In this segment, we will continue our conversation with Professor Philip Xu of the Political Science Department at the National Taiwan University. Philip, we understand that since the inauguration of President Ma Ying-jeou, in May of 2008, there's been tremendous progress in cross-strait relations, not only in terms of the economic domain, but in other areas as well. How would you then first give us an overall, comprehensive overview of the relationship today as compared with the relationship in the years past?
Okay. I think in addition to the economic sphere,
yes,
the political realm and the security realm are the other two key issue areas.
Mm-hmm.
In the political realm, there's been salient easing up, thawing of cross-strait diplomatic competition, as well as political tensions, after President Ma was inaugurated.
Mm-hmm.
I think Beijing has been aware of the fact that it has to permit certain international space for Taiwan, so that the perception of self-dignity, as well as the willingness for the Taiwanese people to remain cooperative with Beijing could be sustained or even enhanced. For example, we have seen that there's been essentially no more countries cutting their diplomatic ties with Taiwan and veering their diplomatic recognition to China ever since President Ma was inaugurated. We heard about several instances where the third country's leaders or new governments would like to approach Beijing for this kind of pursuit, but because of the tacit understanding across the strait. So that kind of pursuit was not really successful. As far as I understand it, Salvador was perhaps one of the cases. And also we see a very important progress being made in the World Health Assembly, that Taiwan was allowed for participating in this assembly in the capacity of an observer, perhaps for the first time in the past few decades or so. That's really very important progress, not only in terms of a diplomatic achievement, but also because this organization is more related to the so-called human security.
Of course.
Because of humanitarian concerns, rather than egoistic political interests of sovereign states per se. So I think that's another important issue. In terms of the security realm, I think there have been a lot of discussions regarding, for example, whether more confidence-building mechanisms could be erected in the future. But we have to recognize the fact that China's, for example, missile threats targeting Taiwan has not been really minimized or effectively moderated. And I think more efforts has to be made in this area. We would certainly, as President Ma has mentioned, and also actually as the Chinese leader Hu Jintao has mentioned, the cross-strait CBMs is perhaps one of the areas that could see further progresses in the next few years.
And also one area that's closer to your current profession. Of course, we may see the incoming mainland students to Taiwan's higher education starting sometime next year, 2010. And how would you think, with the expected influx of mainland students to Taiwan, that how would you think that will impact Taiwan's education system, and also how would that help or hurt the cross-strait relations overall?
Well, I think first of all there are some positive impacts that we could envision. The first one is that it could, to some extent, alleviate the problem of insufficient enrollments for some of the higher education institutions in Taiwan, especially some private universities. Well, of course, these Chinese students would be very selective in terms of the ideal institutions to be enrolled in. But, I guess not all the prestigious universities in Taiwan can absorb all of them. So, this effect, I think, would be true. Another positive effect is for our students to be more familiar with the thinking, the norms, the culture, and everything on the parts of their youth in that society, which I think is of fundamental significance for the long-term stability of cross-strait relations. 10 years or 20 years from now, the mutual perception, the level of mutual cooperation or hostility would hinge a lot upon the recognition and perceptions of today's young people.
Yes.
So these educational exchanges, I think, is really important.
Yeah.
My personal experience tells me that most of these Chinese students staying or living in Taiwan for their studies have generally undergone a lot of changes regarding their initial perceptions with Taiwanese societies.
Okay, good.
There could be some negative effects. For example, there could be, I guess, isolated incidents for misunderstandings or hostilities among students because of the initial incompatibility of thinking with these two kinds of young people. But I think that's a problem that can be resolved in the long run. On the other hand, there is a potential risk that could be contemplated, but I think it's under the control of our government education policy, which is whether or not these incoming Chinese students would take away some of the educational resources enjoyed by our students. But I think as long as we can control the incoming volume of these students, that's not a serious problem.
Yes. And also, Philip, I know you being a long-time observer of domestic Chinese society. How have you, in your study, how have you discovered the Chinese perception towards, Taiwan? How has that perception changed, since the tremendous progress that we have seen that was made in cross-strait relations over the past year?
I think the most salient change takes place on the part of the, I would say, ordinary citizens, and especially the young people, the young citizens in the Chinese society.
Yes.
During periods where cross-strait tensions escalated, these young people in China tended to view Taiwan as a real troublemaker, or as intentionally looking for trouble with China. So, for example, many of my friends in China who are professors there have told me that during periods of escalated tensions, they sensed a sharply rising hostility of these young people toward Taiwan, and particularly in some of the concrete instances, they saw like a sort of almost unanimous voice from their students to call for their government to use force against Taiwan. But I think that has almost totally changed ever since cross relations has improved since last year. And this is also according to information that I got from my friends as professors in China. So that's a very obvious change. On the parts of intellectuals, I think that's not an important issue. Many intellectuals, if not most of them in China, have actually cast their hope for more democratic or at least more liberalized or pluralistic China upon Taiwan. So on the other hand, when they saw Taiwan's democracy to go hand in hand with the de jure independence movement, they were disappointed. And that made them sort of dismiss the significance of the Taiwan's democracy. But when cross-strait relations really improved, their hope are kind of revived. And I think this is also a salient phenomenon, as I have observed during the past year, that many or most of these Chinese scholars based in Taiwan have again paid their attention to many of the democratic practices as well as traditions in Taiwan. For example, many of the local governance institutions or behaviors in Taiwan be more willing to engage in scholarly exchanges and dialogues with our research communities here.
And also another thing that you mentioned earlier, that following the progress made in cross-strait relations, that we see the foreign relations of both sides, diplomacy, have also entered into a new age. And within less than a month, President Ma Ying-jeou traveled twice to Central America, in addition to solidify our diplomatic ties with countries there, but also at the same time trying to explain the changes, in our foreign policy conduct. We're going to move away from the checkbook, diplomacy of the past or dollar diplomacy of the past, and we're going to be, more pragmatic and putting Taiwan's national interests first, not so much on ideology. So how would you think that, with the progress that we have seen in cross-strait relations, how would you think that will impact our relations with the foreign diplomatic allies and also to neighboring countries, in the Pacific Asia region?
I think that will certainly make a very important imprint on their perceptions or their strategies toward diplomatic recognition chosen between Taiwan and China. For one thing, they would recognize the value of Taiwan's democracy, as well as this pluralistic and the liberal society much more than before, rather than viewing Taiwan simply as a source to derive economic benefits or even economic rents for specific political parties or even politicians in those countries. And also, I think that would also beef up their perception or belief that Taiwan has really stepped out of the previous trap of the vicious cycle of switching of these countries switching diplomatic recognition and Taiwan's endless employment of this checkbook diplomacy. So overall speaking, I think that would be really in the long-term benefit of Taiwan's international space.
Okay, good. And we're going to take another short break, and we'll be right back to the Taiwan Outlook, and we'll continue this conversation with Professor Philip Xu of the National Taiwan University. We'll be right back.